Hello again, Equiano Chapter 2 now. We're going to hear about his capture and enslavement. Understand that everything he's telling us as an argument against the slave trade. And so he starts out by explaining that his father had slaves and that he, as a young kid, thwarted some kidnappers who intended to enslave him. And that finally in Section 2, he and his sister are captured and enslaved. Now, with all of that in there, you've got to wonder, well, why is this an argument? How does this argue against the Atlantic slave trade? And it certainly does. It has to do with the nature of slavery within African society at the time. And so that's something to understand. What is he telling us about the nature of slavery in African society at the time? The next thing to notice in this chapter is the way in which things change for him as he moves from his homeland towards the coast. And finally, his first encounter with whites and with ships. You'll notice on page 31, this is section 5 for those of you reading it online. He says the first object that saluted my eyes when I arrived on the coast was the sea, and a slave ship was then riding at anchor and waiting on its cargo. And he begins to talk about being taken in by bad spirits and how he feels about the whites that he first meets. He's also unclear about how a ship actually works and begins to tell us about some of the misery of the Middle Passage, or the passage from Africa to the islands of the Americas. He talks at length about the experience, and in particular about the stench of the slave ship. And that's something that it's not easy to capture as a historical fact without an eyewitness. And finally, on page 36, at the very end of chapter 2, he's giving us his first direct argument against the slave trade, and he appeals to the reader's Christianity. And I think that's worth noting as well. So it's a brief chapter, about 14 pages. I hope you enjoy it, and you'll have a chance to move on with chapter 3 for next week. Bye-bye.